I am Clara Bennett, and I am 32 years old. 2 months ago, on the evening of our annual autumn family gala, in front of 30-odd relatives, my parents handed my older sister a luxurious $15,000 European river cruise package. Then, they turned to me and handed me a crumpled, $2 state sweepstakes scratch-and-win ticket with a mocking, pitying smile. "This is all that is appropriate for your current situation, Clara," my mother said. Her voice was deliberately projected, carrying across the vast dining room loud enough for every single aunt, uncle, and distant cousin to hear. They laughed. All of them. The sound of their amusement echoed off the crystal chandeliers and the imported hardwood floors. They did not know that that little, insignificant scrap of cheap paper would change absolutely everything. $100 million changes everything, but I promise you, it does not change things in the way you might assume. Before I take you through every twisting turn of this story, if you find yourself drawn in by the truth of family dynamics and the ultimate pursuit of freedom, please take a moment to settle in, maybe grab a warm drink, and prepare for a journey. I always love knowing who is listening out there in the world, so feel free to leave a trace of where you are right now. Now, let me take you back exactly 2 months to that crisp, bitter autumn night. The night the grand illusion of the Bennett family finally began to crumble into dust. The Bennett family autumn gathering was never just a dinner. It was always a meticulously choreographed production. Not in the warm, cozy, nostalgic sense that you see in holiday movies. It was more like an opening night on a stage where everyone was required to perform their assigned roles flawlessly. I pulled my battered station wagon into my parents' sprawling, circular driveway at exactly 5 o'clock in the evening. The air was sharp with the smell of burning leaves and impending frost. I was carrying a heavy, handmade artisan tart of caramelized pears and a massive, sprawling bouquet of rare nightshade orchids I had cultivated myself in my greenhouse. I am a botanical restorer, you see. I specialize in bringing dying, rare plant species back to life and restoring antique conservatories. I had spent 4 months nurturing those specific orchids. Their petals were a deep, velvety midnight purple, perfectly dramatic for the season. My mother opened the heavy oak front door before I even had the chance to reach for the brass knocker. "Oh, Clara." Her eyes flicked down to the magnificent bouquet, lingered for a fraction of a second, and then darted away with a profound lack of interest. "Still playing around in the dirt with your little plants, I see." Before I could formulate a response, a high-pitched squeal erupted from behind her. Serafina had arrived. My mother rushed right past me, her arms outstretched, nearly knocking the orchids from my hands. "There is my golden girl," she cried out. "Oh, Serafina, that dress is absolutely stunning. Is it custom?" I stood frozen in the open doorway, the cold wind whipping around my ankles, holding my flowers, watching my mother embrace my older sister as if she had just returned from a decade-long war. They had seen each other for lunch on Tuesday. Inside, the massive house buzzed with the frantic, performative energy of relatives. Aunts, uncles, and second cousins I barely recognized were scattered across the plush furniture. My father sat enthroned in his oversized leather recliner by the roaring fireplace, deep in an animated conversation with Julian, my sister's husband. My father did not bother to stand when I walked into the room. He offered me a terse nod, barely pulling his gaze away from Julian. "Clara, good. You finally made it," my father said, waving a hand vaguely in the direction of the kitchen. "We need someone to finish setting the grand table and polish the silverware." Of course I was here to work. That was my role. The invisible stagehand holding up the scenery for their beautiful play. The entire living room had formed a captive semicircle around Julian as he loudly described his latest private equity consulting conquest. Everyone leaned in, absolutely captivated by his smooth words and expensive cologne. I knew better. I always had. Julian was slippery. He had the kind of aggressive, polished charm that felt like a thick layer of grease. But I had no solid proof of his nature, only the sharp, persistent instinct of someone who spends her life observing what others ignore. From across the room, Aunt Sylvia caught my eye. She was standing near the grand piano, nursing a glass of wine. She offered me a very small, incredibly sad smile. I filed that look away for later. As the evening wore on, I found myself standing alone in the cavernous dining room, meticulously folding linen napkins into complex swans. My mother breezed in, dragging a bewildered distant cousin by the elbow. "This is Clara, my younger daughter," she announced with a theatrical sigh. "She does gardening. She mows lawns or something with weeds." I stopped folding the napkin. "I restore historical botanical conservatories and cultivate endangered flora, Mother," I said quietly. She waved her manicured hand in the air, dismissing my entire existence with a flick of her wrist. "Same thing, dear. Just make sure the water glasses are filled before you sit down." I kept folding the napkins. I had learned a long time ago that some battles are simply not worth the breath it takes to fight them. Not yet, anyway. I was standing in the shadows of the butler's pantry, refilling the heavy silver water pitcher, when I heard the voices. The heavy swinging door to the kitchen was propped open just a fraction of an inch, and the sound drifted through the narrow gap. It was my mother, my father, and Serafina. They were speaking in that hushed, frantic, conspiratorial tone that families reserve for moments when they are certain the subject of their conversation is out of earshot. "The river cruise departs on the 12th of December, my mother was whispering excitedly. 14 exquisite days winding through the heart of Europe. The whole family. You, Julian, the children, your father and me, and we might even bring Grandma B if her nurse says she can handle the flights." My hand froze instantly on the cold silver handle of the pitcher. "What about Clara?" Serafina asked. Her tone was not heavy with concern. It was the tone of someone checking a box on a logistical inventory. There was a long, suffocating silence. Then I heard my father clear his throat. "She is always busy with her little dirt projects. Besides, a luxury trip like this is exorbitantly expensive. We would have to pay her way, and we simply do not want to burden her with feeling indebted to us." I felt a coldness settle in the center of my chest. They had not bothered to ask if I was busy. They had not inquired if I had savings to afford the trip. They had unilaterally decided that my presence was not worth the cost of a ticket. I pushed the heavy wooden door open with my shoulder. "I am not invited," then I stated flatly. 3 perfectly polished faces snapped toward me in unison. My mother's brilliant smile tightened into a rigid, painful line. My father suddenly became intensely fascinated by the dregs of black coffee in his mug. "Sweetheart," my mother began, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "This trip is specifically to celebrate Julian's massive promotion at his firm. It is really more of an intimate, core family thing." I finished the sentence for her in my head. "An intimate family thing that does not include me." "It is not about you, Clara," Serafina chimed in, her voice coated in honeyed condescension. "We just sincerely did not think you would be interested in fine dining and classical architecture. You are always just so fiercely independent." Independent. It was the sterile, polite word they used whenever they actually meant outsider. I opened my mouth to respond, the anger finally bubbling up into my throat, when I noticed a slow, trembling movement in the dark hallway just behind my mother. Grandma B was standing there. Her ancient, fragile hands were gripping the handles of her aluminum walker with white-knuckled intensity. Her sharp, pale blue eyes met mine. They were fierce, knowing, and brimming with a silent intensity that I could not quite decipher in that moment. She slowly lifted one trembling hand off the walker, reached out into the empty air toward me, and squeezed her fingers together in a gesture of solidarity. She said absolutely nothing. But in that heavy, oppressive silence, I felt completely and utterly seen. "Clara, go help your grandmother sit down immediately," my mother barked, her maternal mask slipping to reveal the irritation beneath. She should not be standing on those weak legs for so long. Before she disappeared around the corner of the hallway, Grandma B stopped and looked back at me over her hunched shoulder. Her thin, papery lips moved in complete silence, forming the words perfectly. "Call Arthur Pendleton this week." I stared at her. I did not understand what she meant. But a cold shiver ran down my spine, telling me that very soon I would understand absolutely everything. The noise in the grand dining room fell to a hush when my father stood up at the head of the long table, tapping his crystal wine glass with a heavy silver fork. "Before we begin this feast, I want to take a serious moment to thank every single one of you for being here under my roof." He flashed a brilliant, practiced smile, the exact smile of a man who had spent his entire adult life selling overpriced insurance policies to desperate people. Family is the only thing that truly matters in this world. 30 people nodded in solemn, mindless agreement. I scanned the room. I counted 30 distinct witnesses to the humiliation that was about to unfold. This year, my beautiful wife Eleanor and I wanted to do something extraordinarily special for our 2 daughters. He gestured grandly, expansively, towards Serafina, who was seated to his right. "Serafina, my darling, come stand by me." Serafina gracefully floated out of her chair, a vision in designer silk and impossibly high heels. My mother practically vibrated with joy as she handed Serafina a thick, cream-colored envelope sealed with gold wax. "For you, Julian, and our beautiful grandchildren. A 14-day luxury river cruise through the heart of Europe. First-class cabins all the way." The dining room absolutely erupted. Thunderous applause. Genuine gasps of delight and envy. Serafina immediately burst into perfectly calibrated tears. They were the pretty kind of tears. The kind that do not ruin mascara and look fantastic in photographs. "Oh my word, thank you so much," she sobbed delicately, throwing her slender arms around our father's neck. "This is far too generous. It is far too much." I knew the exact cost. I had accidentally seen the travel agency itinerary open on my mother's tablet 3 weeks ago. $15,000. As the applause finally began to die down, my mother turned her gaze toward the far end of the table where I sat in the darkest corner. The room grew uncomfortably quiet. The energy shifted from celebratory to deeply awkward. "Clara, honey, come up here," she called out. I pushed my chair back and walked the length of the table on legs that felt like they were carved from solid wood. I reached my parents. My mother reached into the pocket of her tailored blazer and pressed a thin, flimsy paper envelope into my palm. I opened the unsealed flap and pulled out a single, glossy slip of paper. It was a National Platinum Sweepstakes scratch-and-win ticket. A $2 impulse buy from a gas station counter. "This is what truly suits your current situation in life, dear," my mother said, her voice carrying an edge of absolute cruelty masked as playful banter. Her smile did not even attempt to reach her cold eyes. "Who knows? Maybe a little bit of dumb luck will finally find you, since hard work hasn't seemed to pay off." Someone at the far end of the table snickered. Then another person joined in. Julian leaned back in his heavy oak chair, swirling his expensive scotch, a thoroughly arrogant smirk plastered across his face. "Luck is a hell of a long shot when you do not have the basic brains to back it up," he drawled lazily. A wave of cruel laughter rippled through the dining room. Serafina covered her mouth with her manicured hand, giggling behind her fingers. "Oh, Julian, stop it. That is so cute of Mom. Maybe Clara will win $5 and can buy herself a new trowel for her dirt." I stood entirely still, staring down at the brightly colored cardboard ticket resting in my calloused palm. My face burned with a heat so intense I thought my skin might melt. But somewhere deep inside my chest, in a place I had kept locked away and heavily guarded for 32 years, something massive and immovable finally shifted. It cracked. It broke completely free. I looked up from the ticket. I looked at my mother, then my father, then Serafina, and finally Julian. I let a slow, terrifyingly calm smile spread across my face. "Thank you so much, Mother. I am absolutely certain that this will end up being exactly what I deserve." No one in that room noticed the lethal edge hidden beneath my polite tone. But I did. The laughter was still echoing off the walls when a sharp, thin voice cut through the noise like a straight razor. "Richard. Eleanor. This is an absolute disgrace." Every head at the table snapped toward the doorway. Grandma B stood there, having pushed herself up from her chair without her walker. Her small, frail frame was visibly trembling with the monumental effort of supporting her own weight. But her voice possessed a power that commanded the room. "You will not treat Clara this way. Not in front of this family. Not in front of me. Not ever again." The silence that slammed into the room was entirely different from the quiet before. It was a heavy, suffocating, intensely uncomfortable silence. No one had expected the ailing matriarch of the family to speak up, let alone cause a scene. My father's jaw tightened so hard I could hear his teeth grinding. "Mother, please sit down. You are confused." "I am not finished speaking," she snapped back. But my mother was already moving, her heels clicking rapidly against the hardwood floor. She swooped in and wrapped a possessive, forceful arm around Grandma Ba's fragile shoulders with terrifying efficiency. "You are so exhausted, Mom. Your mind is playing tricks on you. Let me take you to the guest suite to lie down. Eleanor, take your hands off me. I am perfectly fine. The doctor said you need complete rest. Come along now, stop making a fuss." I watched, entirely helpless, as my mother physically guided my struggling grandmother away from the table and down the dark corridor toward the guest wing. As she was being led away, Grandma B looked back at me over her shoulder one last time. Our eyes locked. She gave me one single, deliberate nod. And then, her gaze shifted just a fraction of an inch to the left, staring pointedly at her old, worn leather handbag resting on the side table by the window. The bag she carried everywhere. The bag no one in the family was ever permitted to touch. The heavy guest room door clicked shut down the hall. The dining room collectively exhaled a breath of relief. The idle chatter and the clinking of silverware resumed immediately. The uncomfortable moment was paved over and ignored as if it had never occurred at all. But I saw Aunt Sylvia watching me intensely from her seat. Her face was chalky white. She opened her mouth as if she desperately wanted to tell me something, but then fear crossed her eyes, and she looked down at her plate. I quietly excused myself from the table and walked down the hall to the guest bathroom. I locked the heavy brass door behind me, gripped the edges of the porcelain sink, and stared at my own reflection in the mirror. The cheap sweepstakes ticket was still crumpled tight in my sweaty fist. $2. That was the exact monetary value they had assigned to my life. But my grandmother had spoken a name to me earlier. Arthur Pendleton. I knew the name vaguely. He was a prestigious estate lawyer in the city. Why on earth would my grandmother, a woman who lived a quiet life and had no ongoing legal disputes, desperately want me to contact a high-powered attorney? I did not have the answer in that moment. But every instinct in my body screamed that I was standing on the edge of a precipice, and I was about to find out exactly how deep the canyon below me really was. It was approaching midnight. I was in the house alone, performing my usual post-party duties, cleaning up the wreckage of their celebration. Most of the extended guests had fled into the cold night. Serafina and Julian had retreated to the formal living room to drink more wine and aggressively plan their luxury European wardrobe. My parents were standing out on the front porch, seeing off the last of the stragglers. I carried a stack of dirty crystal glasses into my father's private study to retrieve a stray coffee cup I had spotted earlier. The study was dark, smelling strongly of old paper, stale cigar smoke, and expensive leather. I set the glasses down on a side table. That was when I saw it. His massive mahogany desk was usually impeccably organized, but tonight it was a disaster. Papers were scattered wildly across the green leather blotter, as if he had been frantically searching for something and left in a panic when the guests arrived. I stepped closer. The dim light from the hallway illuminated the documents. Stacks of final notices. Bills stamped in violent red ink with the words "past due." A threatening letter from a ruthless commercial collection agency detailing massive arrears. And then, buried just beneath a stack of unpaid utility bills, I saw a document that made the blood freeze in my veins. It was a formal loan agreement. It was signed by my father, Richard Bennett. And on the line below it, as the primary issuer of the loan, was the signature of Julian, my brother-in-law. The principal amount was $200,000. I scanned the terms. The interest rate was absolutely staggering, a predatory, suffocating percentage that you would only expect from dangerous men who operate entirely outside the boundaries of the law. My hands began to shake uncontrollably as I pushed that document aside and flipped to the pages underneath. It got so much worse. The subsequent pages were the collateral agreements for the loan. The collateral was Grandma Ba's historic countryside estate. The beautiful, sprawling stone house where she had lived for 55 years. The house where my mother had grown up. The home that was legally supposed to belong solely to my grandmother until the day she passed away. And there, at the bottom of the final page, was her signature. It was spidery, uneven, and weak. The date next to her signature was from exactly 6 months ago. I closed my eyes as a wave of absolute nausea washed over me. 6 months ago was the exact month Grandma B had fallen down the stairs, shattered her hip, and spent 3 weeks in a rehabilitation hospital, heavily sedated on powerful narcotic pain medication. They had shoved a legal document in front of an impaired, medicated old woman and made her sign away her sanctuary. I reached into the pocket of my apron and pulled out my smartphone. My heart was slamming against my ribs so violently I could hear the blood rushing in my ears. I opened the camera application and began photographing everything. Page after page, paragraph after paragraph. I captured the loan terms, the interest rates, the signatures, the dates. I did not have a master plan in that dark room. I did not know what I was going to do with a digital camera roll full of financial ruin. But as I stood there in the shadows, a profound, chilling clarity washed over my mind. The blatant favoritism, the cruel exclusion, the constant belittling of my career. It was never simply about Serafina being the beautiful golden child. It was never just about them preferring her. I was the threat. I was the quiet, observant one who lived in the background. I was the only person in the family who might eventually ask the right questions, who might notice the frantic shuffling of money, who might realize that the Grand Bennett fortune was nothing more than an elaborate illusion built on debt and deceit. They desperately needed me to feel small. They needed me to stay silent, beaten down, and entirely invisible. That was exactly why I was handed a $2 joke of a ticket while they celebrated with stolen money. I slipped out the back kitchen door into the freezing night air, the photographs securely saved to a hidden folder on my phone, my mind racing 1,000,000 miles a minute. I got into my cold car and gripped the steering wheel. For the first time in 32 years, I decided I was done playing the role of the quiet, accommodating ghost. Exactly 1 week after the autumn gala, I sat in my car in the parking lot of my greenhouse and dialed Aunt Sylvia's number. She picked up on the second ring, her voice breathless and tight. "Clara." "Aunt Sylvia," I said, keeping my voice low and steady. "I need to ask you a question, and I need you to tell me the absolute truth. Is my father drowning in serious financial debt?" The line went completely dead silent. The silence stretched out, heavy and suffocating. "You know something, don't you?" I pressed, my grip tightening on the phone. "How did you find out?" She finally whispered, her voice cracking. "I saw the legal papers scattered on his desk at the house. A predatory loan agreement between him and Julian." "Clara," she gasped, dropping her voice to a frantic whisper. "Do not, under any circumstances, discuss this over the phone." "Why not?" "Because there are horrifying things you do not know yet. Things about Julian. Things about the men your father has involved himself with." "What kind of things?" I demanded. "Not on the phone. Not like this. Meet me this Saturday." The old, run-down diner on the edge of the industrial district. 2 o'clock sharp. "Aunt Sylvia, please just tell me, and Clara?" She interrupted, her voice trembling with genuine terror. "Do not believe a single word Julian ever says to you. He is a monster hiding in an expensive suit." The call abruptly ended. I drove back to my small, drafty apartment above a vacant storefront. The heating was acting up again, and the air inside was bitterly cold. I walked into my tiny kitchen, dropped my keys on the cracked laminate counter, and froze. There, sitting exactly where I had tossed it a week ago and completely forgotten about it, was the crumpled sweepstakes ticket. It looked so pathetic sitting there, discarded and entirely ignored. Much like myself. I sighed, feeling a strange mixture of exhaustion and cynical amusement. Maybe it was finally time to scratch the silver foil off the numbers and collect my imaginary $5 to pay for a cheap cup of coffee. I sat down at my small dining table, pulled a dull penny from my pocket, and carefully scratched off the coding on the first row. I pulled up the official state lottery application on my phone to check the winning numbers drawn earlier that week. I looked at the screen. I looked down at the ticket. The first number matched perfectly. My heart gave a tiny, almost imperceptible flutter. A minor coincidence. I scratched the second box. The second number matched. I stopped breathing for a second. I scratched the third. Match. My hands began to sweat. I scratched the fourth. Match. I scratched the fifth. Match. The room began to spin. The edges of my vision darkened. I slowly, agonizingly, scratched off the final, golden bonus number. It was a perfect match. All 6 numbers. I stared at the cardboard. I stared at the bright glowing screen of my phone. I aggressively refreshed the application. The little loading wheel spun, and the numbers reloaded. Same result. I opened my mobile browser, bypassed the app entirely, and went straight to the official state government sweepstakes website. Same draw numbers. Same result. The grand prize for that specific draw was $100 million. I did not scream. I did not burst into joyful tears. I did not jump up and down. I just sat there in that freezing, dimly lit kitchen, perfectly, terrifyingly still. I sat like a statue for what felt like hours, listening to the drip of the leaky kitchen faucet, trying to comprehend the sheer magnitude of the universe's sense of irony. When I finally moved, my body felt strangely light, completely disconnected from gravity. I opened my laptop and typed a single, absurd query into the search engine. What is the very first thing a massive lottery winner should do? The search results flooded my screen with warnings about anonymity, security, and sudden ruin. And then, like a lightning bolt striking the center of my mind, I remembered Grandma B.A.'s desperate, silent instruction in the hallway. Call Arthur Pendleton. Now I understood. It was time to make the most important phone call of my life. I did not tell a single breathing soul. Not one. For 3 entire days, I walked through my daily routine like a phantom wearing a human disguise. I went to the botanical conservatory, repotted delicate ferns, answered mundane emails from suppliers, and smiled politely at my clients. All while carrying a secret worth 9 figures safely locked in a fireproof box under my floorboards. Every single time my cell phone vibrated with an annoying, demanding text message from my mother or Serafina complaining about the weather or asking me to run a trivial errand for them, I felt an absolute, chilling calm. The number that was about to hit my newly secured bank account was larger than anything their greedy minds could ever possibly comprehend. But the money itself was not what consumed my every waking thought. It was the power. Not the power to crush them, but the absolute, untouchable power over my own destiny. For 32 years, I had been the invisible disappointment. Now, I possessed a fortress of options that they could never, ever breach. I did not call my parents. I did not text my sister. I did not post a cryptic message on the internet or immediately run out to buy a fleet of luxury sports cars. I did absolutely none of the things foolish people do when they stumble into wealth. Instead, at exactly 9 in the morning on a Tuesday, I called the offices of Arthur Pendleton. Miss Bennett, his voice came through the receiver. It was a rich, warm, gravelly baritone, exuding decades of professional discretion. Your grandmother contacted me through her private nurse last week. She said you might be reaching out to me soon. I gripped the phone. She told me to call you, Mr. Pendleton. I have to admit, I do not fully understand why. Perhaps it would be best if you came down to my office in the city, he suggested mildly. There are some rather urgent legal matters regarding her estate that we need to discuss in person. I took a deep breath. There is something else, I said quietly. Something regarding the state sweepstakes. A very long pause followed on his end of the line. You have won something, Miss Bennett? He asked cautiously. $100 million, I stated, my voice entirely devoid of emotion. The silence that followed this time was profound. I could hear the faint ticking of a clock in his office through the phone. Then we absolutely must speak immediately, he finally said. But Miss Bennett, you must understand, the grave matters your grandmother instructed me to discuss with you existed long before any sweepstakes ticket. They are regarding her physical safety, her historic home, and a severe breach of trust. My stomach plummeted, twisting into a tight knot. What about her home? It is much safer if I show you the physical documentation, he replied firmly. Can you be here tomorrow morning at 10? Yes, I said. And Miss Bennett? He added, his tone shifting into something fiercely protective. Do not mention a single word of this phone call or your financial windfall to anyone in your bloodline. Not yet. Do you understand me? I understand completely, I replied. I ended the call and stared at my pale reflection in the dark, mirrored glass of my kitchen window. The crumpled scrap of paper had granted me unimaginable wealth, but Arthur Pendleton was about to hand me a weapon far more dangerous: the unvarnished truth. The law offices of Arthur Pendleton were located on the top floor of a historic stone building in the heart of the financial district. The space smelled of lemon oil, old parchment, and the kind of expensive, aged leather that absorbs decades of secrets. Pendleton was a man in his late 60s, with thick silver hair swept back from his forehead and kind, deeply intelligent eyes peering from behind wire-rimmed spectacles. He was a relic of a bygone era, the kind of attorney who still believed in fierce loyalty and moral absolute right. "Please sit down, Clara," he said, gesturing to a heavy, wingback chair positioned directly across from his massive mahogany desk. I sat, placing my hands carefully in my lap to hide their slight trembling. "What exactly did my grandmother instruct you to tell me?" I asked, wasting no time. He opened a brass-hinged drawer and slid a thick, manila folder across the polished expanse of the desk. 12 years ago, when you were just 20 years old, your grandmother quietly established an ironclad trust fund entirely in your name. "A trust fund?" I echoed, the room suddenly feeling very small. "For me? For you alone." The principal amount was $500,000. The room violently tilted on its axis. $500,000? Why? Why didn't I ever know about this? Why did she keep it a secret? "Because she was terrified, Clara," Pendleton said softly, his eyes filled with profound sympathy. "Terrified of what?" "Of whom?" He sighed heavily, folding his hands together. "She was terrified that if your mother ever discovered its existence, Eleanor would find a legal or psychological loophole to drain the accounts and take it entirely from you." I opened the folder with shaking hands. The documentation was pristine. Legal filings, quarterly bank statements, compound interest projections. It was all real. I had never been destitute in my grandmother's eyes. She had been quietly protecting me my entire adult life. "There is more, unfortunately," he said gently, placing a second, thinner folder on top of the first. "The historic countryside estate. Your grandmother's home." I swallowed hard, the taste of bile rising in my throat. "I saw the papers on my father's desk," I whispered. "My father used her house as collateral for a massive loan from Julian." Pendleton nodded grimly. "The deed transfer was hastily signed and notarized 6 months ago, exactly 1 day after your grandmother was admitted to the hospital with a shattered hip. We have secured her medical charts from that specific week. She was on massive, continuous intravenous doses of Dilaudid and morphine. She was hallucinating and barely coherent." I felt a surge of pure, unadulterated rage. That is blatant elder abuse. That is fraud. Pendleton leaned forward, tapping a gold pen on the desk. "Legally, it is highly suspicious. The signature on the deed is wildly erratic. The timeline points directly to coercion. However, proving criminal coercion in a court of law without an impartial eyewitness is exceptionally difficult, and your family would undoubtedly drag her through a grueling, humiliating trial, claiming she is suffering from dementia." "She had no idea what she was signing," I stated fiercely. "I believe you entirely," he said. "But Clara, the situation is a ticking time bomb. Your father owes Julian $200,000, plus compounding exorbitant interest. Your father is currently completely insolvent. If he defaults on that loan, which he will, Julian Pierce legally seizes the estate. He will evict your grandmother and liquidate the property for a massive profit." The final, jagged pieces of the puzzle slammed into place inside my mind. The endless favoritism. The deliberate exclusion from the family vacation. The constant, insidious narrative that I was a failure who shouldn't be involved in family affairs. I was never, ever supposed to look closely enough to see the rot eating away at the foundation of our family. "What can I do?" I asked, my voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "With your new, rather extraordinary resources," he said, a small, fierce smile touching the corners of his mouth, You possess unlimited options. We can immediately file an aggressive injunction to challenge the deed. We can anonymously pay off your father's debt in full, instantly removing Julian's lien on the property. We can build an impenetrable legal fortress around your grandmother. I looked down at the trust fund documents. $500,000 given to me out of pure, protective love from Grandma B. And $100 million handed to me out of pure, arrogant spite from my mother. Let's build the fortress, I said, looking Pendleton dead in the eye. Let's protect her. Let me pause the story right here for just a fleeting second. I know exactly what you are thinking as you listen to this. You are thinking, Clara, you are going to destroy them. You are going to salt the earth and orchestrate the most vicious revenge plot in history. But you must understand, this is not a story about petty revenge. Revenge is loud, messy, and leaves you just as hollow as your abusers. This is a story about the devastating power of the unvarnished truth. If you want to know exactly how I tore down their illusions, stay with me. Have you ever been pushed to the absolute edge by the people who were supposed to protect you? If you are on my side, let me know. Because what Aunt Sylvia revealed to me next was the gasoline I needed to burn the illusion to the ground. The rain was coming down in thick, gray sheets when I finally met Aunt Sylvia at the rundown diner on the industrial edge of town. The place smelled of stale grease and burnt coffee. It was entirely empty save for a tired waitress dozing behind the counter. Sylvia arrived looking 10 years older than she had at the autumn gala. She slid into the cracked red vinyl booth across from me, clutching her worn leather purse to her chest like a protective shield. "Thank you for agreeing to meet me, Sylvia," I said softly, sliding a mug of hot coffee toward her. "I should have opened my mouth and screamed about this years ago," she whispered, wrapping her trembling hands around the warm ceramic mug. "But your mother, Eleanor, you know exactly how vicious she can be to anyone who challenges her perfect narrative. Tell me everything you know about Julian," I demanded gently. Sylvia squeezed her eyes shut. "He is not a legitimate private equity consultant, Clara. Not in the way he boasts about. He operates in the absolute gutter of the financial world. He lends massive amounts of cash to desperate, failing business owners with interest rates that would make a cartel enforcer blush. He is a predator. He waits until they bleed out, and then he legally seizes their remaining assets." "I already suspected he was dirty," I replied. But Sylvia shook her head frantically. "There is more. It is worse." She reached into her purse and pulled out her smartphone, her fingers shaking as she unlocked the screen and opened her hidden photo gallery. 2 months ago, during your parents' lavish anniversary dinner, Julian had a little too much scotch. He left his phone sitting unlocked on the granite kitchen island. I wasn't trying to snoop. I was just looking for my own phone to call a cab. She turned the bright screen toward me and pushed it across the sticky table. I looked down. They were photographs of text message threads. The conversation was between Julian and a contact saved simply as Chloe. The messages were explicit, highly romantic, and utterly damning. "Can't wait until this suffocating charade is finally over," Julian had written. "Once the deed on the old woman's house fully clears and the cash is secured, I am completely out." "And what about your perfect wife?" Chloe had replied. "Serafina served her purpose to establish my image," Julian texted back. "The divorce papers are already quietly drafted in my desk. She won't see it coming until she's locked out of the bank accounts." I stared at the glowing screen, the words burning themselves into my retinas. "He is actively cheating on her," I said, the revulsion thick in my throat. "For nearly a year," Sylvia choked out, wiping a tear from her cheek. "Chloe is his executive assistant. She travels with him on all his supposed business trips." I wanted so desperately to warn Serafina, but I was terrified. Julian is a dangerous, vindictive man. He ruins people who cross him. "Does my sister have any idea?" I asked. Sylvia shook her head sadly. "I honestly don't think so. Serafina is so deeply obsessed with maintaining the illusion of being the flawless, wealthy wife, the ultimate golden daughter. She refuses to look at anything that might shatter her reflection. She simply doesn't see the monster sleeping beside her." I leaned back against the vinyl booth, my mind processing the sheer volume of betrayal. My sister was incredibly cruel to me. She was vain, deeply selfish and entitled. But she was not my true enemy in this. She was just another clueless victim trapped in the web, entirely unaware that the spider was already wrapping her in silk. "Thank you, Sylvia," I said, reaching across the table and grasping her cold hand tightly. "You did the absolute right thing by telling me this. You have nothing to apologize for." She wiped her eyes with a paper napkin. "I am so terribly sorry I stood by and watched them treat you like garbage for so long, Clara. I am so sorry. It is not too late to fix this," I promised her. "Not yet." The high-end assisted living facility where my family had exiled Grandma B smelled intensely of heavy floral air fresheners, desperately trying to mask the scent of bleach and slow decay. Her private room was small, but flooded with natural afternoon sunlight. It featured a large window that looked out over a desolate, dying courtyard garden that was screaming for my professional intervention. When I walked into the room, she looked physically smaller than my memories of her, her skin almost translucent. But the moment she saw me, her pale blue eyes ignited with that familiar, razor-sharp intelligence. "Clara," she breathed, reaching out a frail hand from beneath the sterile white blankets. "You actually came." "Of course I came, Grandma," I said, pulling a plastic visitor's chair right up to the edge of her bed and taking her hand in both of mine. "I went to the city. I spoke at length with Arthur Pendleton." Her grip on my fingers tightened with surprising strength. "Excellent. Arthur is a fiercely loyal man. He told me everything," I said softly. "Why didn't you ever tell me about the trust fund you set up?" "Because Eleanor would have made it her life's mission to break it and steal it to fund her ridiculous lifestyle," she stated, her voice remarkably firm despite her failing lungs. "Out of everyone in this wretched family, Clara, you were the only one who never once asked me for a single dime. You never expected a handout. You simply loved me. That is exactly how I knew you were the only one who actually deserved it." Tears prickled hot at the corners of my eyes. "Grandma, the estate. Your house. They waited until you were drugged, and they made you sign away the deed." She looked away, staring out the window at the dying garden. "My memory of that entire week is fragments of fog and pain," she whispered. "I remember Richard crying about losing everything. I remember Julian standing over my bed, blocking the light. They told me I was signing medical release forms." "I know," I said, squeezing her hand. "Arthur explained the legal nightmare. But I promise you, we are going to fix this." She turned back to study my face, her eyes narrowing suspiciously. "There is a different energy radiating from you today, Clara. There is something massive you are hiding from me. What is it?" I hesitated for only a fraction of a second. Then, leaning in close, I told her everything. I told her about the crumpled sweepstakes ticket Eleanor had handed me as a cruel joke to humiliate me. I told her about scratching the silver foil in my freezing kitchen. I told her the numbers matched. All of them. $100 million. Grandma B stared at me in stunned silence for a long moment. And then, slowly, a sound erupted from her chest. It was a raspy, breathless sound that sounded like dry autumn leaves rustling in the wind. She was laughing. She laughed until tears leaked from the corners of her eyes. "Oh, the absolute poetry of karma," she wheezed, clutching her ribs. "I always believed that karma kept meticulous ledgers." "I am going to use the money to secretly buy back your estate," I told her fiercely. "I am going to completely clear the fraudulent debt, evict Julian's legal claim, and restore the house. I am going to make sure you can go home and live there safely for the rest of your life. Whatever astronomical cost it takes." She reached up with a trembling hand and rested her palm against my cheek. "I do not need you to wage a war of bloody revenge on my behalf, Clara. I only need you to break your own chains. I need you to be completely free and to protect the things in this world that actually matter." "I will," I swore to her. "Just promise me one thing," she asked, her eyes searching mine. "Anything. Promise me you will not let that kind of money rot your soul. Promise me you will never become anything like them." I leaned down and kissed her paper-thin forehead. "I promise you, B. Some promises are incredibly difficult to make. But this one I intended to keep until my dying breath." 2 agonizing weeks after the autumn gala, the Bennett family gathered once again, this time for a lavish, catered farewell dinner before they departed for their grand European river cruise. I was, naturally, invited, but not as an honored guest. I was summoned as the unpaid help. Clara, please rearrange the floral centerpieces. The lilies are clashing with the table runner. You are supposed to be good with plants. Clara, the hired caterer is confused about the plating order. Go into the kitchen and handle him. Clara, ensure Grandma BA's facility nurses know we will be completely unreachable for 2 weeks in Europe. I executed every single demeaning order with a serene, terrifyingly calm smile. I played my assigned role to absolute perfection. The quiet, subservient, invisible daughter they always expected me to be. Absolutely no one in that room had any idea about the team of high-priced corporate attorneys working exhausting overtime hours on my behalf. No one knew about the anonymous corporate LLC I had rapidly formed to legally claim my massive winnings without exposing my identity to the press. No one knew that in less than 3 weeks' time, the quiet girl arranging their flowers would possess a net worth larger than every single person in that dining room combined, multiplied by 10. The dinner was an insufferable parade of monumental self-congratulation. Julian held court at the head of the table, loudly detailing the exclusive excursions he had booked. Private wine tastings in centuries-old vineyards along the Rhine. An exclusive 7-course dinner at the captain's table. High-end spa treatments in historic bathhouses for Serafina. It is truly a crying shame you could not scrape together the funds to join us, Clara, Serafina said across the table, her tone carrying absolutely zero genuine sorrow. But I suppose someone reliable needs to stay behind and water Mom's exotic orchids while the housekeeper is off. I do not mind in the slightest, I smiled pleasantly, looking her dead in the eye. I sincerely hope all of you have the most revealing, unforgettable time on the water. My father enthusiastically clapped Julian on the shoulder, nearly spilling his wine. This man right here. The absolute best thing that ever happened to the Bennett family legacy. We owe this celebration to his brilliance. Julian locked eyes with me over the rim of his crystal glass. His smile was razor-thin, cold, and intensely calculating, like a predator assessing the caloric value of a small, weak animal. "Hey, Clara," he called out, his voice dripping with heavy condescension. "Have you bought any more of those little sweepstakes tickets? Keep dreaming big. Maybe next time you'll win a whole $5 and can treat yourself to a decent haircut." The entire table erupted into mocking laughter once again. I let the sound wash over me. I let them gorge themselves on their arrogance. "You never know how the universe works, Julian," I replied, my voice smooth as glass. "Luck has a very funny way of surprising the people who least expect it." My mother stood up and raised her champagne flute high into the air. "To absolute family loyalty, to our growing fortune, to the unstoppable Bennetts." Everyone at the table cheered and drank deeply. I raised my simple glass of tap water to my lips and took a very small, deliberate sip. 12 days. In exactly 12 days, they would be trapped on a luxury vessel in the middle of a European river, thousands of miles from home, and my meticulously constructed trap would spring shut. The hectic morning they finally left for the airport to catch their first-class flight, I remained safely locked inside my apartment. "You are really not coming to the terminal to see us off and help with the luggage?" my mother had asked over the phone the night before. Her voice carried that intensely familiar, toxic note of accusation, cleverly disguised as maternal disappointment. "I have a massive structural meeting with a new botanical conservatory client," I lied smoothly. She sniffed loudly into the receiver. "Always putting your little work projects ahead of family. Always work with you." As if she had ever once offered me a seat at their table. As if I had any other choice but to work myself to the bone just to survive. I spent their entire departure day sequestered deep inside Arthur Pendleton's fortress-like office, signing endless stacks of final paperwork to solidify my anonymous LLC. The phenomenal sum of money was scheduled to clear all federal holds and hit the secure accounts by the end of the week. After the staggering taxes were deducted, the final liquid amount was roughly $62 million. It was an amount of capital so vast it defied basic human comprehension. It was more than enough ammunition for the war I was about to quietly wage. I was meticulously reviewing a stack of property transfer documents when my cell phone vibrated violently against the mahogany desk. It was a text message from Serafina. Clara, something bizarre is wrong with Dad's primary platinum credit card. It just got declined at the VIP Port Lounge. Can you quickly wire me $500 for incidentals? I will absolutely pay you back the second we dock. I stared at the glowing text bubble. The sheer, unadulterated irony of the situation was almost too perfect for a human mind to script. It was the very first time in my entire 32 years of existence that my golden, wealthy sister had ever begged me for money. I knew exactly why the card had been declined. The mountain of secret debt was finally catching up to Richard. Julian was clearly no longer covering the massive interest payments to keep up appearances like he had promised. The elaborate, gilded house of cards was finally starting to violently sway in the wind. I picked up my phone and typed my response slowly. I do not have $500 to spare right now, Serafina. You should ask Julian. He is the brilliant financial genius, isn't he? I watched the screen. 3 little gray dots appeared, then disappeared, then appeared again in rapid succession. Never mind. We figured out a temporary fix. I did not bother to ask what the fix was. I simply did not care. The only variable that mattered was that they were on that luxury ship right now. All of them. Eleanor, Richard, Serafina, Julian. Isolated and trapped together in a floating palace for the next 14 days. I turned my attention back to Arthur Pendleton, who was watching me with an expression of quiet amusement. How soon can we officially file the aggressive challenge on the estate deed? I asked him. By Monday morning at 9 a.m. sharp, he replied instantly. Once you give me the green light to make the opening move, the legal mechanisms will lock into place. I stood up and walked over to the massive floor-to-ceiling window in his office, looking out at the sprawling, chaotic city below. Somewhere far across the Atlantic Ocean, a luxury river cruise ship was sailing peacefully down a scenic waterway, completely unaware of the devastating storm I was currently brewing on the horizon. It was day 3 of their grand European vacation. I executed the first phase of the plan. I posted a single, high-resolution photograph to my social feeds. It was a simple image of me standing proudly in front of the grand iron gates of Grandma Bea's historic estate. The caption I typed was brief and entirely devoid of context. Major structural renovation and restoration project officially starting very soon. Moving on to better things. I knew with absolute certainty that my father would see it within hours. Richard checked his social media feeds obsessively, desperately tracking the public successes of his peers to fuel his own fragile ego. It was his primary method of aggressively monitoring what his daughters were projecting to the world. Later that same afternoon, the local evening news broadcast ran a highly publicized segment. The anchor enthusiastically announced that the monumental $100 million state sweepstakes jackpot had finally been claimed. The winner had successfully chosen to remain entirely anonymous through a corporate trust. However, the anchor specifically mentioned that the winning golden ticket had been randomly purchased at a small, dingy convenience store located exactly 3 miles from the Bennett family's suburban enclave. I did not use my wealth to plant that specific geographic detail in the media. The universe simply has a wicked, poetic sense of humor when it wants to. Aunt Sylvia, bless her brilliant, theatrical heart, immediately casually mentioned the news broadcast in the massive extended family group chat. Did anyone else catch the local news tonight? Someone from our exact district won the $100 million jackpot. The crazy part is, they bought the winning ticket at that little rundown corner mart on Elm Avenue. The exact same convenience store where Eleanor had patronizingly purchased my $2 joke of a gift. The group chat instantly exploded into a frenzy of digital noise. Distant cousins began wildly speculating. Uncle Robert started making terrible jokes about suddenly becoming best friends with whoever the winner was. And then, 10 minutes later, a private, direct message popped up on my screen. It was from my mother. Clara, that little sweepstakes ticket I bought you for the autumn gala. You still have it safely somewhere, right? I stared at the message. I decided to let her sweat in the agony of uncertainty for a full, torturous hour before I finally typed my response. Yes, Mother. I still have it. Why do you ask? Just curious. Absolutely no reason. And then she appended a single, nervous, sweating face emoji. Eleanor never, ever used emojis in her messages unless she was severely panicked and trying to mask it. Exactly 1 hour after my reply, my cell phone began to vibrate. It was a phone call from my mother. I let it ring until it went to voicemail. 30 seconds later, a call from my father. Ignored. 2 minutes later, Serafina. Ignored. Then Julian. Ignored. I turned the ringer entirely off and set the phone face down on the kitchen counter. By 8 o'clock that evening, I had 43 desperate missed calls. By midnight, the counter had climbed to 79. The voicemails they left were a fascinating, terrifying psychological study in rapid escalation. They ranged from desperately casual to completely unhinged. I sat alone in the quiet darkness of my new, highly secure luxury penthouse apartment, a temporary rental I had discreetly secured in the city earlier that week. It wasn't wildly ostentatious, but it was safe, impenetrable, and entirely mine. I poured myself a glass of sparkling water and listened to every single message. Mother, attempt number 1, her voice high and tight. Clara, sweetheart, it is Mom. We are having a wonderful time on the water, but I just really wanted to hear your voice. Call your mother back the second you get this. Mother, attempt number 7, the facade beginning to aggressively crack. Clara, this is highly important. You need to pick up the phone right now. Call us back immediately. Mother, attempt number 15, devolving into pure guilt manipulation. I honestly do not know why you are so viciously ignoring your own parents. We paid for your phone plan for years. This is so cruel and entirely unlike you. Father, attempt number 3, trying to assert dominance across an ocean. Clara, it is your father. Pick up the damn phone. We need to discuss family business. Serious business. Serafina, attempt number 5, her voice shrill with anxiety. Clara, seriously, what on earth is going on back home? Mom is having an absolute panic attack in the stateroom and Dad is screaming at the concierge. Call me. And finally, Julian. His voice was as sickeningly smooth and calculated as ever, masking the utter desperation beneath. Clara. Julian here. Listen, I think we should sit down when I get back and seriously discuss some high-yield investment opportunities. Family has to protect family wealth, you know? Give me a call. Let's talk strategy. I let the sheer weight of their collective panic wash over my skin like a cleansing wave. None of them were terrified for my physical safety. They were terrified of the money slipping through their greedy fingers. I picked up my phone and sent a brief text message to Arthur Pendleton. Is every legal mechanism firmly in place? His reply came back within 30 seconds. The trap is set. Ready to execute on your command. I opened the chaotic family group chat, which included my parents, my sister, and Julian, and I slowly typed one single, authoritative message. I will initiate a video conference call tonight at precisely 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Every single one of you needs to be present on the screen. There is something of massive importance I need to share regarding the family. Within mere seconds, a flood of frantic confirmations filled my screen. Mom typed, of course, my sweet girl. We will all be gathered in the main lounge. Dad wrote, looking forward to hearing your news, kiddo. Serafina added, can't wait. And Julian simply sent a sleek thumbs-up icon. They honestly thought they had won the war. They fully believed I was going to humbly announce my staggering sweepstakes victory and then immediately hand them the reins. They expected me to ask for my father's blessing and Julian's financial guidance. They had absolutely zero idea of the absolute hellfire that was rapidly descending upon them. I spent the remainder of the afternoon carefully organizing the digital files, ensuring my screen-sharing capabilities were flawless, and rehearsing the exact cadence of my delivery. This was not a screaming match of vengeance. This was the methodical delivery of truth. And the truth is the sharpest blade ever forged. At exactly 8 o'clock, the sun having set outside my penthouse windows, I clicked the button to initiate the video call. Almost instantly, their 4 faces popped onto my large laptop screen. They were crowded closely together on a plush, velvet sofa in what appeared to be the luxury ship's private upper lounge. Through the massive glass windows behind them, I could see a breathtaking European sunset reflecting off the dark river. Clara. My mother's voice burst through the speakers, dripping with a sugary sweetness that made my teeth ache. "There is our beautiful girl. Oh, we miss you so terribly much, honey. We sincerely wish you were here experiencing this majesty with us," my father boldly lied, nodding solemnly. The sheer, terrifying sincerity in their voices was almost masterful enough to be convincing. Serafina waved enthusiastically from the background, leaning over Julian's shoulder. "Hi, sis. You look so refreshed. Have you been doing a new treatment with your hair? It looks so expensive." For the record, in 32 years, Serafina had never once complimented my hair. Julian sat slightly apart from the family huddle, his arms tightly crossed over his chest, his eyes narrowed, watching my face on the screen with a cold, analytical intensity. "Clara, good to see you online," he murmured. I kept my face perfectly neutral. A blank slate. "Thank you all for making the time to join this call," I began, my voice steady, calm, and utterly devoid of warmth. "I know you are all very busy enjoying the luxury vacation you planned." "Family absolutely comes first, Clara," my mother declared dramatically, clutching her hands to her chest. "Always and forever." I noted the spectacularly ironic choice of her words. So my father interrupted, leaning his face closer to the camera lens, his greed barely contained. "We heard some extremely interesting rumors floating around back home. Something massive regarding a sweepstakes ticket?" I did not flinch. I did not smile. I looked directly into the camera. Yes, I won the grand jackpot. The digital silence that followed was so absolute it was deafening. I could see the varying expressions of shock, greed, and terrifying joy freeze on their faces. And then, all four of them began screaming over each other at once. "Oh my dear God, that is incredible. How much is the payout, Clara? Congratulations, we are so rich." I sat back in my chair and simply let them exhaust their frantic energy. I let them cheer and weep for a full 2 minutes. When the chaotic chatter finally began to die down, I leaned forward and spoke again. $100 million. My mother's hand violently flew up to cover her mouth. My father's jaw dropped, his mouth opening and closing silently like a suffocating fish. Serafina looked violently pale, swaying slightly as if she might actually pass out from the shock. Julian was the only one who recovered his composure rapidly. "Clara," he said, his voice dropping into his authoritative, commanding business tone. "That is staggering, life-altering capital. You are going to desperately need sophisticated professional help managing an asset of that magnitude. We need to lock down aggressive investments, offshore tax mitigation strategies, and ironclad asset protection trusts before the government bleeds you dry." "I already have retained senior legal counsel," I interrupted smoothly, cutting him off. "Sure, of course you have a basic lawyer," Julian countered smoothly, holding his hands up placatingly. "But you need a trusted family member who deeply understands high-level global finance to oversee everything. You need me, Clara." I did not raise my voice. I did not break eye contact with the lens. "Before we discuss a single cent of my capital," I said, the temperature of my voice dropping below freezing, "there are several deeply buried matters that this family urgently needs to be made aware of." Julian's practiced, arrogant smile flickered slightly at the edges. "What kind of matters are you talking about?" he asked warily. "The unvarnished truth," I replied. I reached out and clicked the button to share my computer screen with the conference call. Let me show all of you exactly what I mean. The very first high-resolution document violently materialized on their screen. It was the heavily redacted, predatory loan agreement I had photographed in the study. The signatures of Richard Bennett and Julian Pierce were crystal clear at the bottom. "This," I announced, my voice echoing clearly through their lounge, "is a highly illegal, predatory shadow loan agreement constructed between my father and Julian. The principal is $200,000, attached to an extortionate 32% compound interest rate." On the video feed, the color instantly drained entirely from my father's face. He looked like a corpse. Where in God's name did you get that?" he stammered, terrified. "And this," I continued relentlessly, ignoring his panic and clicking to the next brutal slide, "is the fraudulent collateral deed to Grandma Ba's historic estate. It was signed over to Julian as leverage, dated exactly during the week she was hospitalized in agony, completely incapacitated by heavy narcotic pain medication. My mother's mouth fell open in horror. No sound escaped her throat. She stared at the screen, then slowly turned her head to stare at her husband. That signature is wildly erratic because Grandma B had absolutely no cognitive awareness of what you forced her to sign, I explained coldly. My legal team has fully secured her verified medical records from the hospital, legally confirming she was heavily sedated and legally incompetent at the time of the transfer. This is textbook elder abuse. It is considered a massive felony fraud. Clara, stop this immediately. This is private family business. My father suddenly shouted, panic making his voice crack. I am far from finished, Richard, I snapped back, entirely dropping the title of father. I clicked the mouse one final time. This time, a sprawling mosaic of dozens of bright text message screenshots filled the screen. The explicit, romantic, and utterly damning conversations between Julian and his assistant, Chloe. These, I stated, enunciating every single syllable with lethal precision, are a year's worth of digital messages between Julian and his executive assistant, Chloe. They have been engaged in a highly aggressive, physical affair for the past 12 months behind Serafina's back. Serafina's face crumpled inwards as if she had been physically struck with a hammer. What? She whispered, staring at the screen in pure disbelief. I began to read Julian's own words aloud, making sure they echoed in the room. Once the deed on the old woman's house fully clears and the cash is secured, I am completely out. She served her purpose to establish my image. The divorce papers are already quietly drafted in my desk. That is not. Julian leaped up from the sofa, his heavy chair violently scraping against the polished floorboards. Those messages are entirely fabricated. She is a psychotic liar. She paid someone to Photoshop those to destroy me. Am I? I asked calmly. I looked directly at the small box containing my sister's face. Serafina, look away from the screen. Look directly into your husband's face right now and ask him if I am lying. Look at his eyes. Serafina slowly, agonizingly turned her head to look up at Julian. Her voice was nothing more than a broken, terrified whisper. Julian? Is it true? Julian did not attempt to answer her. He did not try to comfort her. He lunged forward, violently grabbed his cell phone from the coffee table, and stormed completely out of the frame without a single word. My mother instantly burst into hysterical, wailing tears, clutching her face. My father just sat there on the velvet sofa, completely motionless, staring blankly ahead as his entire fraudulent life imploded in real time. Here is exactly what is going to happen next, I said quietly, cutting through the sounds of my mother's sobbing. I am currently utilizing my capital to completely pay off the entirety of this fraudulent loan. I am aggressively clearing Julian's filthy lien from my grandmother's estate. The clean deed is being legally transferred back into a highly protected, ironclad trust in her name alone. Every single one of you will be legally barred from ever claiming a single right to her property or her assets. Clara, please, I am begging you, my father pleaded, tears suddenly streaming down his face. We are your family. We are blood. Family does not drug and steal from a 90-year-old woman so they can pretend to be rich, I shot back, my voice vibrating with decades of repressed rage. And I am still not done. Alright, I know so many of you listening to this right now are silently screaming in victory at whatever screen you are watching. But you must hold on, because the absolute fallout of this story is not over yet. If you have ever laid awake at night dreaming of looking your abusers in the eye and delivering the undeniable truth, just take a breath with me. Because what happened to Julian in the days that followed? Even I, with all my careful planning, did not see the sheer magnitude of karma that was coming for him. Keep listening. Because the aftermath was biblical. I abruptly reached out and terminated the video call before a single one of them could formulate a response. The very last image burned into my mind was a chaotic Renaissance painting of destruction. Serafina violently weeping into her hands, my mother screaming something incomprehensible at my father, and Richard sitting perfectly frozen with his head buried in his hands. Julian had completely vanished. The screen blinked black. My penthouse apartment was plunged into total silence, save for the hum of the city traffic far below. I had vividly imagined this exact moment of confrontation for weeks. I honestly thought I would feel a massive rush of adrenaline, a profound sense of triumph, a glorious, cinematic vindication. But instead, as I sat alone in the dim light, I felt incredibly hollow. I felt a bone-deep exhaustion, as if I had just violently run a grueling marathon I had never asked to participate in. Within 30 seconds, my cell phone completely exploded. A relentless barrage of calls, text messages, and frantic voicemails flooded the device. I switched it to absolute silent mode and shoved it into the bottom drawer of my desk. A sudden, sharp knock at my heavy front door made me jump. Every muscle in my body tensed. Absolutely no one in my family knew the location of this secure apartment. I crept to the door and looked through the brass peephole. Aunt Sylvia was standing in the hallway. She looked incredibly small and just as exhausted as I felt. I unlocked the deadbolts and pulled the door open. "How on earth did you find me here?" I asked gently. Arthur Pendleton finally gave me the address. I swore to him I wasn't here to cause trouble. "I hope you do not mind," she said softly. I stepped aside and let her inside. She took one long, painful look at my pale face, dropped her purse, and pulled me into a fierce, suffocating hug. "You did incredibly good, Clara. You did the agonizing thing that not a single one of us had the courage to do for decades." "Did I really?" My voice cracked horribly as I hugged her back. "I just utterly annihilated my entire family on a conference call." "No, sweetheart," she said, pulling back and gripping my shoulders firmly. "They violently destroyed themselves years and years ago through their own greed. You simply walked into the dark room and finally turned on the lights." A sharp buzz echoed from the desk drawer. I walked over, pulled the phone out, and looked at the locked screen. It was a single text message from Serafina. I honestly did not know about Julian's business. "I swear to you on my life I did not know he was a criminal. I am so deeply sorry about how he treated you. About everything. I need time to process my entire life falling apart, but I am so terribly sorry." I read the glowing words twice, then a third time. "What do you think about it?" Sylvia asked gently, watching my face. I sighed heavily and set the phone face down on the glass table. "I don't know yet. I honestly do not know if she is being sincere, or if she is just panicking because she has lost her safety net. I don't know if anything in this family will ever actually change." "You do not have to make a decision about them tonight, Clara," Sylvia said firmly. And she was absolutely right. For the very first time in my entire 32 years on this earth, I possessed unlimited time. I had endless options. I had total, unadulterated freedom. 2 weeks later, Arthur Pendleton called me on his secure line with phenomenal news. "It is entirely finished, Clara," he announced, a rare note of genuine triumph in his stoic voice. The aggressive deed challenge went through the courts significantly faster than we anticipated. With the undeniable combination of her hospital medical records and the sworn, notarized witness affidavit from your Aunt Sylvia, the primary banking institution immediately agreed to void the original, fraudulent transfer. I let out a massive, shaky breath that felt like it had been trapped in my lungs for a month. "So, who legally owns the house right now?" I asked. "Technically, the bank currently holds the property," Pendleton explained. "Your father immediately defaulted on the massive loan payments the second Julian frantically withdrew his financial backing to save himself. But here is exactly where your vast resources come into play. I had already made my firm decision weeks ago. Pay the bank off completely. Whatever the final number is. Do not negotiate, just end it. It will be approximately $230,000, accounting for the principal, the compounded interest, and the aggressive legal fees required to transfer the deed cleanly back into your grandmother's name," he cautioned. "Execute the wire transfer immediately," I ordered. The sum of money was a ghost. A tiny rounding error compared to the vast fortune resting in my secure accounts. But what that specific sum of money represented, the physical safety and emotional peace of the only person who ever truly loved me, that was worth everything I possessed. "There is one final legal matter we must discuss," Pendleton said carefully. "I have thoroughly drafted an aggressive protection clause to attach to the property. Once the historic estate is legally registered in your grandmother's name, no blood member of the Bennett family, and that explicitly includes your mother and father, can ever legally claim any rights, access, or inheritance to the property. Not while she is alive, and not after she passes away. When that inevitable day comes, the entire estate transfers irrevocably to you, exactly per her original wishes before this nightmare began. I thought back to that cramped dining room. I thought about the crumpled, brightly colored sweepstakes ticket and the cruel, mocking smile stretching across my mother's face. $2. That was what she had spent to humiliate the inconvenient daughter. Add one more binding clause to the documents, Arthur, I said softly. I want it permanently in writing that my grandmother can live in that estate for the rest of her natural life, with an entire team of full-time, private medical care if she ever requires it, completely paid for in advance by my trust. I will draft it immediately, he agreed. I smiled genuinely for the very first time in what felt like an eternity. Arthur. Thank you. Thank your grandmother, Clara, he replied warmly. She saw the fire in you long before you ever knew it was there. I hung up the phone and immediately called the nursing facility. I am coming to pick up Beatrice Bennett right now, I told the head nurse. Have her bags packed. It is time for her to finally go home. As for Julian, he desperately attempted to control the catastrophic narrative. Of course he did. Predators always try to spin the story. He aggressively told anyone in his social circles who would listen that the text screenshots were entirely photoshopped. Clara Bennett is a deeply jealous, mentally unstable woman, he loudly claimed at his country club. She is just a bitter gardener trying to violently tear a successful family apart because she failed at life. His pathetic smear campaign might have actually worked 10 years ago, before the era of instant digital communication. And it might have worked if he hadn't deeply underestimated Chloe. His mistress was apparently fiercely intelligent, and she was absolutely furious about being abruptly abandoned and thrown under the bus in the middle of a massive scandal. 3 days after the explosive video call, Chloe went scorched earth nuclear. She weaponized every social platform on the internet. She published hundreds of time-stamped, geotagged photographs of them together at lavish resorts. She posted scanned copies of expensive restaurant receipts, luxury hotel bookings paid for by his firm, and thousands of intimate, highly explicit messages that made the few I had shown look like polite dinner conversation. She even uploaded a 20-minute video statement, her expensive mascara running down her cheeks as she stared into the camera with pure fury. Julian Pierce is a pathological liar, a manipulator, and a financial fraud, she fiercely declared to her thousands of followers, a number that rapidly multiplied into the millions within 48 hours. He explicitly promised me he was leaving his wife. He used me to hide his dirty assets. And now he is trying to pretend I do not exist. I am burning his kingdom down. Serafina formally filed for a ruthless, aggressive divorce before the river cruise ship even managed to dock at its final port. But a scorned mistress was not the only severe consequence Julian had to face. Within a single week of the viral explosion, 3 of Julian's former business associates quietly came forward to the State Attorney General's Severe Crimes Division. They provided mountains of physical documentation outlining his sprawling network of predatory lending practices. The extortionate interest rates he had been quietly charging desperate people were not merely unethical. They were aggressively illegal under the racketeering laws in 4 different states. I did not have to lift a single finger to destroy him. I did not have to spend a dime of my fortune on revenge. The rotten foundation he had built his entire life upon simply collapsed under its own massive weight. My father, Richard, formally declared total bankruptcy the following month. The insurance brokerage he had proudly owned and operated for 3 decades was completely gone. The assets were viciously liquidated by the banks to pay off the staggering mountain of hidden debts that had been accumulating like a cancer long before I ever found those terrifying loan papers in his study. When I read the news of his financial collapse, I felt absolutely nothing. No dark satisfaction. No lingering pity. Just a strange, quiet, deeply peaceful emptiness. Karma, Grandma B said to me quietly when I finally told her the news. We were sitting together in her beautiful, sun-drenched living room for the first time in an entire year. I told you, Clara. I always believed that karma keeps the books balanced. She reached out and squeezed my calloused hand. I squeezed back firmly. Some profound truths do not require any words to be understood. My mother finally called me on a blocked number exactly 3 weeks after the disastrous video call. I almost ignored it, but some deep, lingering curiosity made me press the green button to accept. Clara. Her voice was utterly ruined, sounding as if she had been screaming and crying for days on end. Clara, you have completely and utterly ruined our lives. No tentative hello. No asking how I was doing. Just straight, venomous accusation. I did not ruin a single thing in your life, Mother, I replied, keeping my voice incredibly steady and cold. I simply told the truth out loud. The truth? She laughed, a harsh, bitter, jagged sound that scraped through the phone. Everyone in town knows everything now. The nosy neighbors, the entire congregation at the church, my private country club book circle. I have been hosting that elegant book club in my home for 18 consecutive years, and now not a single one of those women will even return my phone calls. I am deeply sorry that you are experiencing the consequences of your own actions, I said. Are you? Are you really sorry? Her voice cracked violently, rising to a hysterical pitch. You possessed absolutely everything. You had $100 million secretly sitting in a bank account. You could have easily helped us. You could have saved your father's failing business with a stroke of a pen. You could have fixed everything. I could have financed your elaborate fraud. I corrected her, my voice remaining an impassive wall of ice. I could have smiled and pretended Julian wasn't a cheating, predatory monster. I could have quietly let you steal Grandma B.A.'s historic sanctuary and throw her onto the street. We are your blood family. She screamed into the receiver. And so is the grandmother you drugged, I snapped back. A heavy, suffocating silence fell over the line. Mother, I said quietly, the finality ringing in my words. I am not going to block this phone number. If, someday in the distant future, you ever want to have a genuine, painful conversation, one where you finally take absolute accountability for the abuse you inflicted, and not just complain about the status you lost, I will be here to listen. But I absolutely refuse to sit on this phone and let you blame me for the devastating fire you lit with your own hands. You are so terrifyingly cold, she whispered, sounding genuinely afraid of me for the first time in my life. When did you become such a cold, heartless bitch? I learned it from watching The Absolute Best, Mother, I replied. She slammed the phone down. That was the very last time I heard her voice for over 6 months. My father never attempted to call me at all. His pride was too thoroughly shattered. I heard through the family grapevine via Aunt Sylvia that they had been forced to move into a tiny, cramped, 2-bedroom apartment on the loud, industrial side of the city. Richard was currently working as a low-level claims adjuster for a massive, soulless corporate insurance firm, a humiliating demotion for a man who used to own the building. Eleanor had been forced to take a part-time job working the customer service desk at a local, mundane grocery store to help pay their basic utility bills. I did not gloat over their misery. I did not feel a grand, soaring sense of vindication. I just quietly continued building my own life. Because that was always the ultimate goal. Not to ruthlessly punish my abusers, but to finally, truly live entirely free of their shadow. The letter arrived exactly 3 months after the disastrous river cruise. It was not a sterile email, nor a frantic text message. It was a physically handwritten letter, 3 pages long, penned on heavy, pale blue, expensive stationery. It was filled with my sister Seraphina's elegant, looping cursive handwriting, which I had not seen directed at me since she wrote me a cruel note in middle school. Dear Clara, I honestly do not know how to even begin this letter, so I will just start with the only words that matter. I am profoundly sorry. I am not apologizing because I secretly want a handout from your massive fortune. I am not apologizing because I am trying to manipulate my way back into your good graces. I am writing this apology because I should have spoken these exact words to you a decade ago, and I was too much of a coward to do it. I knew Julian had severe moral failings. I did not know the horrific details about Chloe, but I always knew deep down that something was fundamentally toxic about him. I aggressively ignored my own instincts because admitting the truth to myself meant admitting that my entire perfect, enviable life was a massive, hollow lie. I knew Mom and Dad treated you with horrific, inexcusable cruelty. I selfishly told myself it was not my business to intervene. I constantly told myself that you were fine, that you were always so resilient, so wildly independent, so incredibly capable of handling the abuse. I convinced myself you did not need me to stand up and defend you. That was the pathetic excuse of a weak coward. You were my little sister. I was supposed to protect you. I should have fiercely defended you anyway, even if it cost me their approval. My divorce from Julian is finally complete. I am starting completely over from zero. I honestly have no idea what my life is going to look like moving forward, but I know with absolute certainty that it has to be entirely different from the lie I was living. You do not ever have to forgive me for my complicity. You absolutely do not owe me a single second of your time or an ounce of your grace. I just desperately needed you to know the truth. I finally see you now, Clara. I see exactly what I willfully missed for 30 long years. I am so terribly, deeply sorry. Love, Serafina. I sat at my kitchen island and read the pale blue letter 3 times in complete silence. Then I folded the thick paper carefully and tucked it safely away inside my desk drawer. I did not immediately write a response back to her. I was not ready yet. But for the very first time in my entire existence, I felt a massive, rusted psychological door shift inside my chest. A door that had been heavily padlocked for decades was creaking open, just a fraction of an inch. We eventually met for coffee the following month at a quiet, neutral cafe in the city. The interaction was incredibly awkward, highly stilted, and fraught with nervous energy. Neither of us had the slightest idea how to actually behave like loving sisters anymore. The muscle memory simply did not exist. But we were both actively trying. And in the wreckage of our family, trying was a monumental start. Grandma B finally came home to her estate in the middle of a beautiful, blooming April. I was standing on the grand front porch when the specialized medical transport van slowly pulled into the long, winding cobblestone driveway. It was the exact same driveway where I had violently skinned my knee learning how to ride a bicycle 30 years ago. The exact same driveway where she had stood for decades, waving a tearful goodbye after every single holiday visit, shrinking smaller and smaller in our rearview mirror until she completely disappeared from sight. She looked even smaller now, more physically frail. But when the medical attendant carefully wheeled her chair up the brand new, seamlessly integrated wooden ramp I had overseen the installation of, her pale eyes instantly found the massive front garden. It was wildly overgrown, terribly neglected by the months of vacancy, but the foundation of life was still there. And she smiled brilliantly. It desperately needs some serious work, she noted, her voice weak but full of joy. I am going to personally fix every single inch of it, I promised her, placing a hand on her fragile shoulder. That is my true specialty, remember? I had spent the entire previous month aggressively preparing the historic house for her triumphant return. I hired the best contractors to install state-of-the-art, discreet accessibility features. We placed a highly advanced, luxurious hospital bed in the sprawling master bedroom suite overlooking the trees. I secured a team of the absolute best, most compassionate round-the-clock nursing care money could acquire. I bought the absolute best of everything because for the first time in my life, I possessed limitless resources to spare for someone I loved. We sat together in the warm, glass-enclosed sunroom later that afternoon, quietly watching the bright yellow finches aggressively attack the new bird feeders I had installed near the glass. "You really managed to do all of this for me?" she asked softly, gesturing weakly at the flawless renovations. "It is your sanctuary, B," I replied gently. "It should be perfect and entirely comfortable for you." She was quiet for a very long, contemplative moment, watching the birds flutter against the blue sky. "Your mother called me on the telephone last week," she finally said. My entire body instantly tensed up. "What exactly did Eleanor say to you?" "She desperately wanted me to use my influence to talk to you, to manipulate you into coming back into the family fold and rescuing them from their poverty." I took a deep breath. "And what exactly did you tell her?" Grandma B slowly turned her frail neck to look at me directly. Her pale eyes, despite her failing physical vessel, were as fiercely sharp and piercing as ever. I told Eleanor that you never actually left this family. I told her that true family is not about showing up in a fancy dress for performative holiday dinners to show off. True family is about fiercely showing up in the dark when the absolute worst happens and doing what is right. She reached out and wrapped her thin fingers around my wrist. You fiercely showed up, Clara. When every single other person in this bloodline looked at an old woman and only saw what assets they could legally strip from me, you looked at me and saw exactly what you could give. I blinked hard, fighting back the hot tears threatening to spill over my eyelashes. I just did what was morally right, B. That is always the absolute hardest thing to do in this world, Clara. And you did it anyway, without hesitation. We sat there together in the warm room until the sun slowly dipped below the tree line, painting the sky in violent shades of orange and purple. There were absolutely no more words needed between us. Exactly 1 year later, if I were to look at my life on paper, I would barely recognize the woman living it. I still proudly work every single day. Not because I am desperate for the paycheck, but because I am deeply, passionately in love with what I do. My botanical restoration firm has massively expanded. I hired 3 incredibly talented new assistant architects. I moved out of my cramped apartment and leased a beautiful, expansive office space with massive windows overlooking the city skyline, and I currently have a highly exclusive, 2-year waiting list of wealthy clients begging for my designs. I have personally designed and overseen the construction of 3 massive, inclusive public conservatory gardens in the past 12 months alone. The staggering sweepstakes money sits mostly entirely untouched in highly diversified, globally secure investments, quietly compounding interest. I purchased a modest, beautiful, mid-century modern house located just 10 minutes away from Grandma Be's estate. It is nothing flashy, nothing that draws unwanted attention. Just a quiet, incredibly peaceful space with enough room for me and the hyperactive rescue dog I finally adopted. A scruffy, endlessly loyal terrier mix named Barnaby, who absolutely loves to aggressively dig massive holes in my experimental flower beds. The foundation I built, however, is my absolute proudest legacy. The Beatrice Heritage Foundation anonymously awards massive, life-changing financial scholarships to young, marginalized women desperately pursuing careers in the obscure arts, botanical science, classical painting, obscure musical composition, architectural design. Women coming from harsh, unsupportive families who simply do not understand their minds. Brilliant women who have been aggressively told by their parents that their dreams are wildly impractical, that their unique talents hold absolutely zero financial value in the real world, that their voices do not matter. Every single tear-stained acceptance letter I read feels like a tiny, glorious act of absolute defiance against the universe. It is a massive middle finger to every single parent who ever cruelly sneered, but how on earth will you ever make real money doing that? I visit Grandma Ba's house every single day without fail. Some afternoons, her mind is crystal clear and razor sharp, and she regales me with hilarious, scandalous stories about her wild youth in the city. Other days, she is incredibly physically exhausted, and her mind wanders, and we simply sit together in a warm, deeply comfortable silence, watching her beautifully restored garden aggressively burst into life. Those rare, black-petaled tulips you love so much are finally pushing through the soil, I told her quietly just yesterday afternoon. You meticulously planted those specific bulbs, she reminded me gently, patting my hand. They still belong entirely to you, Clara. She smiled, a look of profound, infinite peace settling over her wrinkled features. Everything truly good and beautiful that I possess in this life is simply because I chose to share it with the rare people who actually appreciated its value. Never forget that lesson. I promised her I would remember. I was the living, breathing proof of that exact philosophy. The staggering sum of money did not instantly manufacture happiness for me. Money cannot buy joy, but what it did buy was an impenetrable fortress of options. It bought me absolute, unassailable freedom from the crushing weight of other people's toxic expectations. It bought me the physical and mental room to finally breathe deep into my lungs. True, Lasting happiness came from somewhere else entirely. It came from dedicating my life to work that profoundly mattered. It came from slowly building authentic relationships forged entirely in the fires of truth, rather than the convenience of lies. It came from the remarkably simple, yet terrifyingly difficult act of finally allowing myself to be exactly who I was meant to be, without apology. People ask me about my estranged family sometimes. They ask where they ended up, or if the magical passage of time has magically healed our wounds and brought us back together for picturesque holiday dinners. The honest, unvarnished answer is incredibly complicated. My parents still reside in that tiny, cramped apartment across the city. Richard still works his miserable desk job as a corporate claims adjuster, answering to men half his age. Eleanor still works the mundane customer service desk at the massive grocery chain, scanning coupons for the neighbors she used to look down upon. They are financially stable, but they are constantly, bitterly struggling. They are not utterly destitute, sleeping on the streets, but their reality is a million miles away from the gilded, aristocratic life they once violently believed they were entitled to. We communicate very, very occasionally. Richard sends a brief, sterile text message on my birthday every year. Hope you are doing well out there. Love, Dad. I always politely respond. Thank you. I sincerely hope you are well too. That is the absolute, definitive extent of our relationship. A hollow, polite digital exchange once a year. Eleanor has never, ever offered a genuine apology for the lifetime of psychological abuse. She has boldly attempted to call me a handful of times over the past year. Her calls usually consist of her endlessly complaining about her exhausting, mundane circumstances, dropping heavy, passive-aggressive hints that she could desperately use some substantial financial assistance from her wealthy daughter. I always listen to her complaints with polite, detached silence, and then I smoothly change the subject to the weather. Sometimes, she gets incredibly frustrated by my iron boundary and aggressively hangs up the phone on me. Other times, we manage to sustain a grueling 10 minutes of superficially civil conversation before her deeply ingrained, bitter resentment begins to violently creep back into her tone. I am nowhere near ready to let them back into my inner life. Maybe I never will be ready. And I have finally realized that is perfectly okay. Absolute forgiveness is not a mandatory debt that you owe to the people who systematically destroyed your peace. Forgiveness is a beautiful, optional gift that you give entirely to yourself, to release the poison from your own veins, only when and if you are completely ready to do so. Serafina, however, is a slightly different story. We have met for quiet coffee together 6 times in the past year. We have managed to share lunch twice. We send text messages occasionally. It is not an everyday occurrence, but it is enough to keep the fragile bridge from collapsing. She is actively, aggressively rebuilding her entire life from the ashes. She has a modest new apartment, a challenging new entry-level job in marketing, and a brilliant new psychological therapist who is actively helping her unpack exactly how her desperate need for external validation led her directly into the waiting arms of a monster like Julian. We are not best friends. We are not incredibly close. We may not ever be the sisters you see in heartwarming television commercials, but we are genuinely trying. I honestly didn't fully realize how completely, fundamentally toxic our family system was until the day I finally got out from under it. She confessed to me last month, staring down into her latte. I honestly thought the way they pitted us against each other was normal. I thought I was the lucky one because I played the game better. We both violently believed whatever narrative we had to believe just to mentally survive childhood, I told her. She nodded slowly. And for the very first time in my presence, she didn't instantly burst into dramatic, performative tears. That, to me, was massive, undeniable progress. As for Julian Pierce, I honestly do not know where he currently resides, and I do not care enough to spend 30 seconds running an internet search to find out. Some people in this world simply do not deserve to occupy a single square inch of rent-free space inside your mind. I have made my permanent peace with the past. I am aggressively moving forward toward the light. And that is more than enough for me. Whenever the incredibly rare person discovers the truth about my identity, they always inevitably ask me the exact same question. Did winning $100 million overnight completely change your entire life? The answer I give them always deeply shocks them. No, I say, not really. The vast wealth simply amplified what was already there. What truly, fundamentally changed the trajectory of my entire life was a singular, terrifyingly clear, crystallizing moment of realization. The moment I stood in that dining room, clutching a piece of trash, and realized with absolute certainty that I had spent 32 painful years desperately waiting for cruel, broken people to finally see my inherent value. And the brutal truth was, they never ever would. Not because I wasn't incredibly valuable, brilliant, and worthy of profound love, but simply because their eyes were completely incapable of looking for anything other than their own selfish reflections. That crumpled, humiliating sweepstakes ticket was the greatest gift I have ever received. Not because of the staggering 9-figure bank account it eventually unlocked, but entirely because of the horrific truth it forced into the light. The people in this world who were biologically obligated to love and protect me only ever pretended to care when they mistakenly thought I possessed an asset they could violently take from me. That singular, devastating psychological revelation was worth infinitely more to my soul than any massive, impossible financial jackpot. If you are listening to this story right now and you find yourself trapped inside a toxic family system that actively refuses to see your brilliant light, I desperately need you to know something. You absolutely do not need to win a $100 million lottery jackpot to finally free yourself from their grip. You do not need a magical stroke of astronomical luck. You do not need their reluctant permission to leave. What you need is to make one single, terrifying, life-altering decision. The decision to completely stop allowing incredibly broken people to dictate your worth. You must aggressively set your boundaries like walls of solid iron. You must have the courage to walk away from grand dining tables where your only invited purpose is to quietly serve the people who mock you. You must go out into the wilderness and build your own beautiful table, even if you have to build it with your bare hands. The sudden influx of money gave me incredible logistical options, but the absolute power to change my life was always resting right there inside my own chest. I just honestly didn't realize I possessed it until someone handed me a $2 joke of a ticket with a vicious smirk, absolutely convinced they had finally put me in my pathetic place. They certainly did put me in my place. They just had absolutely no idea that the place I belonged was at the absolute top of the world. I am Clara Bennett. I am 33 years old. I am a master botanical restorer, a fiercely devoted dog mother, a fiercely protective granddaughter, a quiet philanthropist, and most importantly, above all other titles, I am a woman who finally, unapologetically, chose to save herself. And that, I promise you, is the only real jackpot that matters in this life. If my journey has resonated with the quiet battles you are fighting in your own life, I truly see you. Do not let anyone hand you a fraction of what you deserve and tell you to be grateful. Keep fighting for your light.